Chapter 17 is on classification of organisms. 17, Section 1, begins with that biodiversity, which is just the variety of organisms that are on Earth. Taxonomy is a special branch of biology that works on classifying organisms. So a taxonomist would go through and name organisms and then also group them based on their characteristics and their history. Not all organisms are classified yet. Every day there are new ones that are discovered. It's estimated that there's only about 1/20th of the living things on Earth that have actually been identified. So there's still lots more to potentially come. I'd just like you to look at this list of objects here and think about how you might go about classifying them. Perhaps you would group them by what room you would use them in, so like office supplies and kitchen, bath supplies. Maybe you would do them based on like tools and perishables. So kind of some different ways that you might go about classifying these objects instead of just having a list of a ton of different individual items. And that's pretty much what taxonomists are going to do. They're going to figure out what types of traits that they can group these organisms into to basically just help to simplify studying them and figure out the relationships between the organisms. Aristotle was one of the first people to come up with a classification system. And he was a Greek philosopher. This was done over 2,000 years ago. And what he did was classify organisms into plants or animals, so two main groups. Later on, he then went back and classified animals, broke them down to where they lived, so land, water, or air. And then plants can be based on their stems, which there were 3 different types that he used to classify them by. So those are some smaller subcategories, but his main 2 groups were plants and animals. And then he also introduced a naming system. His names were common names. And this was helpful to a point, but it also caused some troubles because it could vary from place to place. So, people in Europe might not have been calling an organism the same thing that we would call it in the United States, and that will cause confusion between people. A little bit later, a Swedish naturalist, Carolus Linnaeus, came up with a classification system that we still use today. It's a 7-level hierarchy system that is uses morphology, which is the structure and form, to classify organisms. So a hierarchy is a system that builds one category builds on another, that builds on another. We talked about this back with cells that make up tissues, which make up organs, and so on. I gave the example here of the mail system. You can't just put a house number on something. You have to put what street it's on and what city it's in, what state it is, what country it is. So all of those things build and work together. Linnaeus also came up with a scientific naming system, which is able to be universal for all scientists to use. These are Linnaeus's 7 levels from largest to smallest. The first is the kingdom. There are going to be 6 kingdoms that we'll talk about eventually. Kingdoms are then broken down into phylums. We call them phylums when we're referring to animals and divisions when we're referring to plants. Mainly they'll be referred to as phylums. Then phylums are divided into classes into orders, orders into family, family into genus, and then lastly, genuses are broken down into species. So again, kingdom is the largest and species would be the smallest group of Linnaeus's classification. Here's an example of a leopard. If you follow this along here, he belongs to the animal kingdom. Within the animal kingdom, there's the phylum Chordata. Within the Chordata phylum, there are different classes, one of which is mammals, so that is what the leopards belong to. Within that class, there are multiple orders, one of which is Carnivora, and that's what the leopard lives in. Carnivora is broken into different families. The leopard belongs to Felidae, which refers to the cat family. And then the family is broken into genus, and the leopard is in Panthera, which refers to big cats. And then finally, the genus is broken into species, and the species is going to be Pardus, which is specific to leopard. Some further classifications we sometimes see are varieties and subspecies. These are smaller groups than your species. So these have been added on since Linnaeus, and they can be grouped into these based on different geographic locations. So animals that are part of the same species that live in different areas are called subspecies, and then plants that are part of the same species but live in different areas are called varieties. And then finally, binomial nomenclature is the scientific naming procedure. This means the two-name naming system. So it's the scientific name is going to have two parts to it, the genus and the species. So those two smallest levels of Linnaeus's classification, those are the names of the organism. So for us as humans, our genus is Homo and our species is Sapiens. So our full scientific name would be Homo sapiens. And when it's written, it needs to be written in either italics or underlined, and the genus is going to be capitalized, the species will not be. So only the first letter of the name is capitalized. And then the names generally give hints about the organism, so either where it's found or who discovered it, or some type of feature that they're characteristically known for. For instance, Linnea borealis. Linnea obviously refers to Linnaeus, the scientist that we were just discussing, and then borealis refers to the northern hemisphere. So this is a flower that was discovered by Linnaeus and grows in the northern hemisphere. An amoeba, if you recall looking through a microscope and seeing it, just kind of bounces around. Well, that's what this name literally means, chaos, chaos. It means to bounce around. So it describes what sort of features that organism has.